Guys, Box of Gossip here. Once again, apologies for the poor lighting. I'm not filming in my usual room for this particular evening because of some noise disturbance. For this particular video, we're here to discuss the pay-per-view headline fight this weekend between Chris Eubank Jr. and Renold Quinlan for the IBO Super Middleweight belt. Notice how I said IBO Super Middleweight belt. You can make your own mind and your own determination as to whether you believe this is a world title or not. In this particular video, we've discussed the Eubanks enough on the channel. We'll probably do it again on the podcast tomorrow. But in this particular video, I'm not necessarily looking to discuss whether the fight is pay-per-view. I'm not looking to discuss any of the hype or the drama surrounding it. I'm more looking at the fight, because essentially that's what that's going to boil down to. On Saturday night, the two men are going to enter the ring. They're going to enter the ring at super middleweight, and they're going to have a scrap. And I guess at that point, whether the fight is pay-per-view, whether Eubank Senior has said that his son's going to wreck Andre Ward, regardless of any of that, you're going to have two men having a fight, and anything can happen. Let me start by saying, long-time viewers will know I've been sceptical as to whether Chris Eubank Jr. will make a success at 168 pounds. Certainly sceptical that he will be as successful at 168 pounds as he will be at 160. Let me tell you why. I'll give you two examples. Number one would be Martin Murray. Number two would be Arthur Abraham. These are two guys who have been operating at the top of the middleweight division in relatively recent times. These are two guys who, for me, could attribute a large amount of their success due to the size and strength advantage they enjoyed at 160 pounds. You see them go up to 168 pounds, suddenly that size and strength advantage disappears. They're fighting guys who are substantially bigger men. They're fighting guys who are used to being hit a lot harder and have greater punch resistance, and they're fighting guys who hit back with increased power. It really does make a substantial difference. The difference between middleweight and super middleweight is 8 pounds. That is a relatively big gap. If you look at the guys who campaign at middleweight, let's look at some examples who Chris Eubank Jr. has actually fought. Let's talk Billy Joe Saunders, and let's talk Spike O'Sullivan. These are guys who are smaller guys. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I've met both Billy Joe and Spike O'Sullivan, and these are not big guys. These are guys who are, I guess you could say, smaller middleweights as opposed to bigger middleweights. And Chris Eubank Jr. has definitely enjoyed a substantial size advantage in the vast majority of fights in his career. I'm unaware of the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, and I think I've watched them all, but I'm unaware of the Chris Eubank Jr. fight where he is not the bigger man in there. Now, I'm not saying Renold Quinlan's size is going to make a difference in this fight. I'm not even saying Renold Quinlan is bigger than Chris Eubank Jr. What I am saying is, in general, I do not believe that with Eubank's style, the size difference between 160 and 168 is going to complement that. Let me tell you, if you stuck Renold Quinlan next to Billy Joe Saunders, he'd look like a big man. Renold Quinlan is a bigger man than the guys Eubank Jr. has been operating against. And I think with Eubank Jr.'s style, the way he likes to fight inside the pocket, the way he likes to overwhelm and bully and force the pace on people, I think the size advantage that he's typically enjoyed in fights, losing that will be a real blow to him at 168 pounds. Frankly, Eubank Jr., he clearly carries power and there's a snap to his work, but as anyone who's followed his career knows, this is not a one-punch knockout artist that we're talking about here. This isn't a Gennady Golovkin in terms of his punching power. This is a guy who more overwhelms and wears you down. And for me, that is going to be a lot harder to do when you're facing genuine 168 pounders. because of that, in an earlier video where I discussed boxing betting, I speculated that without having really watched Renold Quinlan fight, it may actually represent a good value if you could get Chris Eubank Jr. to win the fight on points at 5-1. Because let's be honest, Eubank Jr. hasn't exactly been stopping the top middleweights he's been facing early in fights. So I guess my logic was that at £168, it may take him even longer to get to his opponents, bearing in mind they're bigger, stronger men who are used to being up against bigger, stronger men. Now, whilst I still agree with that in theory, having watched Renold Quinlan a bit more, and Renold Quinlan's back catalogue available on YouTube is not extensive, nor is it forthcoming. But having watched bits of Renold Quinlan, I have actually come to the conclusion that my pick for the fight will be Chris Eubank Jr. to win by stoppage. And I suspect that stoppage will probably come in the 5th or 6th round. I think at that period of the fight, Eubank Jr. will get to Quinlan. Looking at Quinlan stylistically, for me, he's a guy who mixes it up. He does do the odd bit of lateral movement, and he throws the odd jab, and his jab isn't great. He kind of pushes the jab out. He does like to fight on the inside as well. He's someone who's open to a fight on the outside and the inside from the little bits I've seen of him. Technically, he's not all there. He's square on. He's a bit wide. His punches just aren't, the most naturally thrown. His style looks a tiny bit forced without looking to be overcritical, and I believe he will be a sitting duck for the Eubank assault when it eventually does come. I suspect the way Chris Eubank Jr. fights these days, I suspect we'll see a low-key first 2 rounds. I think Eubank Jr. will feel it out, behind the jab and from the outside, and I think part of that's going to be that he's fighting on pay-per-view in a big event. He's probably not going to want to wipe this opponent out in a round or two. He's going to want to give some value for money, or the perception of some value for money, should I say. So I suspect Eubank Jr. is going to fight from the outside, behind the jab, at distance for the early rounds. Similar to what we saw when he fought Tom Doran. And I don't think Eubank Jr. is a world-class fighter from the outside. I believe he can be caught, and I just don't believe that he puts his punches anywhere near as well from the outside as he does from the inside. So I suspect Eubank Jr. will win the opening rounds from the outside in a sort of uninspiring fashion. Probably towards the 3rd or the 4th round, I suspect Eubank Jr. will put the pedal to the metal, start to force the pace on Renold Quinlan. And when he does, despite the fact that Renold Quinlan, I'm sure, is a warrior, despite the fact that he's a bigger man, and despite the fact that I'm sure he's as hard as nails, when Eubank Jr. does put that pedal to the metal, I don't see the fight lasting too long. I see it being 1, 2, 3 rounds max from that point on. I've had a look at Quinlan. He's just too defensively open. He's susceptible to the uppercut on the inside. Remember me saying that because I believe it's going to be a key factor. We know Eubank Jr. loves that uppercut. I've watched Renold Quinlan fights. I've dug around before making this video, and I've seen him eating an uppercut on the inside, and that is not what you want going into a fight with Chris Eubank Jr. I believe he's going to be susceptible to Chris Eubank Jr. throwing neatly placed hooks to the floating rib area and on his sides. I think it'll be vulnerable to the body, but I suspect the uppercut is going to be, as it has been in other Eubank Jr. fights, I suspect it's going to be a recurring theme here. I think when Eubank Jr. opens his barrage, Quinlan will instinctively shell up and go like this, but I think unlike other fighters who will throw 5 or 6 punches and then go on the outside, Eubank will force the pace continuously. We've heard Senior talking about 50, 60 punch combinations. That's an exaggeration, but don't be surprised if we do see 15, 20 punch combinations, because I believe once Eubank Jr. starts, Quinlan will put his hands up, he'll form a tight guard, and we'll see Eubank Jr. consistently pouring it on, body, 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 uppercut up the middle. And I just don't think Quinlan's going to have anything technically or anything elsewhere otherwise in his game to keep Eubank Jr. off him, and to keep that distance and to stop the fight ending at that particular point. Therefore, I'm afraid it's an uninspiring pick, but my pick is going to be Eubank Jr. to win the fight by stoppage early to mid rounds. I suspect he's going to have far too much for Renold Quinlan. Let me know your thoughts. Have you seen much of Renold Quinlan? What do you think of him? What's your prediction for the fight? If you've enjoyed this analysis, please take the time to click the thumbs up button. That supports the channel. It helps me get a wider audience. If you're new, please do take the time to subscribe. Many thanks indeed for watching, and please stay tuned to the channel because I'll be covering all the build up this week. Thanks for watching, guys.